Hi, I'm Dave DeWitt, and today I'd like to talk about the question, why does knowledge require the fear of the Lord? This podcast is basically an analysis of Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. My thesis is the fear of the Lord is the only path to truth, the way things actually are. So there is an inseparable connection between knowledge and the fear of God. Notice Proverbs 1:29. They hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. Proverbs 2:5. Then you will discern the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God. Acts 9:31. So the church throughout Judea and Galilee and Samaria enjoyed peace, being built up and going on in the fear of the Lord. Acts 13:16. Of Israel, and you fear God, listen. 2 Corinthians 5:11. Therefore, knowing the fear of the Lord, we persuade men. The question is, if the fear of the Lord is the beginning of the knowledge, why can an atheist learn to drive a car, do algebra, or develop a computer program without the fear of the Lord? Why are the Jews in general, and compared to most people groups, knowledgeable without a fear of the Lord? The liberal progressive world does not connect knowledge to the fear of the Lord. The high-tech world in which we live was invented in a large part by people who have no fear of the Lord at all. So why does the Bible claim that the fear of the Lord is necessary for knowledge? Most people would say Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci have a lot of knowledge. But Solomon would say, no, they don't. Here's an observation. The Bible clearly and consistently connects the fear of the Lord with both wisdom and knowledge. I can understand how wisdom is unattainable without the fear of the Lord, because wisdom is a skill for living with discernment, which in the New Testament includes an eternal perspective. Clearly, that requires the fear of the Lord. But the discussion about the knowledge is not wisdom. In the Bible, the fear of the Lord seems to be necessary for knowledge itself. And the Bible applies it to all knowledge. Solomon applied it to seemingly every area of life in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Also, God applied it to Job, using various areas of science in the natural world. Paul's prerequisite for these he spoke to in Pisidia and Antioch was, you who fear God. If we're going to answer the question correctly, we need to ask, what is fear? What is that fear when it's applied to the Lord? Biblically, fear is terror in the context of reverence. Fear includes terror, not just respect. I might give a gift to a professor who I respect, but in that case, I define what fear and respect looks like. If I'm running from a bear in the woods because of fear, he defines what fear looks like. If we don't have a fear of God, his commandments become options, kept on our terms. Fear is terror, but in the context of God, it's not just terror by itself, such as running from a bear in the woods. That terror would not include reverence or piety. Fear, as it applies to God, is terror which comes from reverence. When Ezekiel had a glimpse of the throne of God, he fell on his face. When Isaiah saw the Lord sitting on his throne, he said, woe is me, I'm ruined, because I'm a man of unclean lips and I live among people of unclean lips. Apostle John tells us that the 24 elders around the throne of God fell down and worshipped. The very presence of God creates a reverence-induced fear. Why do we need to fear the Lord? Answer, we need to fear the Lord because we're sinners. Notice the fear of the Lord did not exist in Adam and Eve before the fall. They only began to fear the Lord when they were disobedient and ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God told him in Genesis 2, "For any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat." It seems that Adam had no fear of God until he ate from that tree. Fear of the Lord is never a prerequisite for knowledge when there's no sin, as with Adam and Eve in the garden, good angels, 4 living creatures around the throne, or Jesus. Jesus' knowledge did not require fear of the Lord. It's our sin nature that creates the need for the fear of the Lord as an access to knowledge. After he ate the fruit, the first thing Adam said to God was, "I was afraid." It's the same word for fear God used throughout the Old Testament. After they ate from the fruit of the tree, Genesis 3:22, then the Lord said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil." Definition of morality and creation of conscience. What about the biblical command, "Do not fear," and "perfect love casts out fear"? All the commands to not fear in the Bible are about not fearing something other than God. The Bible never tells anyone to not fear God. For example, Jesus said, Matthew 10:28, "Do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul. Rather fear him who is able to destroy both body and soul in hell." Apostle John wrote, 1 John 4:18 and 19, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment, and the one who fears is not perfected in love." The statement, "perfect love casts out fear," assumes there is first fear for perfect love to cast out. The perfect love John is talking about is in the context of fearing punishment. The Greek word for punishment is the word for torment. According to the Strong's Greek Dictionary, the default position for anyone who realizes they're a sinner facing a just God is fear. You're only open to the gospel of salvation if you realize you're lost. The death of Christ on the cross delivers believers from punishment for their sin. Believers do not stop fearing God, they stop fearing punishment. What's the beginning of knowledge? The Hebrew word for beginning in Proverbs 1:7 means beginning first things or principal things. It seems that Solomon is saying that the beginning of knowledge would be the first thing or primary or principal thing that needs to happen before knowledge is possible. Solomon is not saying that the fear of the Lord is all you need for knowledge, but that it starts there. The fear of the Lord is a prerequisite for any and all kinds of knowledge. So let me suggest a definition. Scholarly or secular wisdom, secular knowledge, is a recognition of what we understand to be true. Biblical knowledge is a recognition of the truth itself. More specifically, true knowledge, biblical knowledge, what Solomon called knowledge, is a recognition, through understanding and discernment, using the logic we are born with, that something is true the way things actually are, because it comes from the general or special revelation of God. Here's a biblical perspective of knowledge. Job 38:1 and 2, the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind and said, "Who's this that darkens counsel without knowledge?" God gave Job a science quiz to show Job that he could not answer any of the questions. The point was, and is, all knowledge, including scientific knowledge, will end up being wrong if it doesn't come from the fear of God, because only God has all knowledge. Proverbs 2:6, for the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. Solomon connected knowledge to that which was only obtainable from his mouth, which will only be sought by those who fear the Lord. Hosea said, listen to the word of the Lord, O sons of Israel, for the Lord has a case against the inhabitants of the land, because there's no faithfulness or knowledge of God in the land. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I'll reject you from being my priests. Hosea told Israel they were to come to God with knowledge. For example, they were not to approach God with things like mysticism, magic, blind faith leaps, or even sacrifice and burnt offerings. They were to come to God with the knowledge of God. Romans 3 and Romans 10. Through the law comes the knowledge of sin. For I testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not according with knowledge. Paul emphasizes two things about knowledge. One, knowledge of God comes from the revelation of God. Through the law comes the knowledge of sin. And second, even a zeal for God was not valuable without knowledge. There's one more point I'd like to make before we leave the subject. Knowledge which begins with the fear of the Lord always includes morality. David said in Psalm 34, "Come, you children, listen to me. I'll teach you to fear the Lord. Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it." And remember, Jeremiah told us, the heart's more deceitful than all else and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Paul discussed the morality, the moral sensitivity of the Corinthians. Perfectly holiness, he said, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. Peter affirmed that knowledge must follow moral excellence. 2 Peter 1:5, supply moral excellence, and in your moral excellence, knowledge. In the secular mind, there is a disconnect between knowledge and morality. A scientist, a university professor, or a doctor of something or another is not concerned to be lacking in the knowledge when he's acting immorally. But the fear of God, which leads to knowledge, is always connected to morality. For example, we can know how to drive a car, even with a humanitarian morality, without knowing the fear of the Lord. But without the fear of the Lord, I can't know if I should be driving my car. Driving cannot be disconnected from what I do with my driving. My driving ability, even obeying the traffic laws and using driver courtesy, does not tell me if it's good to drive my car, say to get an abortion, to drive my car to buy illegal drugs, to drive my car to meet someone I'm committing adultery with. Only the knowledge of driving that begins with the fear of the Lord can determine that. If I know engineering without the fear of the Lord, I can use my skill to help a terrorist build a bomb. With our intelligence, we made an atomic bomb that we're now afraid will use to destroy one another. Technical knowledge of, say, an architect, doctor, lawyer, engineer, or computer programmer are only real knowledge if connected to morality. For example, a doctor could have great skills and use them to abort babies, illegally sell body parts, or take a bribe to favor certain people. Technical knowledge without morality may be like knowing how fast you're going in a car headed for a cliff. If it does not come from someone pursuing moral excellence, don't trust it as being the knowledge of the way things actually are. We all know intelligent people whose lives are a disaster because they do not have the morality which comes from the fear of the Lord. Well, I'm going to stop here because it's long enough for a podcast. Thanks for listening. If you want to study more about this and more in depth on it, I've got a longer paper that's available on our website, relationalconcepts.org.